Warm welcome to another great episode of Agile Wisdom Podcast. I'm 𝗲𝗳𝗳𝗲𝗶𝗃𝗲𝗹𝘆, your host for the day. Today, we have invited a very special guest for the show. He's a leading voice and a thought leader on customer-centric product development. Jeff helps the organizations build better products and the executives build cultures that build better products. He recently quoted another great book called Who Does What by How Much. And this book is a how-to guide for implementing objectives and key results within the organizations. And let me have the privilege of talking to this great personality, the keynoter and the consultant, Jeff Gothelf. This is the Agile Wisdom Podcast. Hi, welcome to another great episode. I'm 𝗲𝗳𝗳𝗲𝗶𝗃𝗲𝗹𝘆, an Agile and OKR coach. I've been coaching and consulting so many clients globally. So privileged to speak to you with regard to OKRs, which is a great, one of the must-have management methodologies in your organization. Again, warm welcome and thank you very much for joining Agile Wisdom Podcast to share your insights. And we hope this discussion will be fruitful for those who are keen to understand how OKRs can be adapted to your organization. In this discussion, we're going to talk about the essential pointers for an organization to adapt OKRs within the organization. I generally call OKRs is a management methodology and a critical thinking framework. And this will help you to define and refine your operating system. Now, to start the discussion, Jeff, I would like to start with a very fundamental question. How can you define OKRs? In your definition, what are OKRs?
I'll do it very shortly here, but I read a whole book about it recently called Who Does What by How Much, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Look, OKRs are a goal-setting framework for teams, and they are designed to align teams and an organization around the customer benefits that we would like to see in the world. And the goals are divided into two parts: objectives and key results. Objectives are the qualitative side of the conversation. What is the customer benefit that we hope to create in the world when we're successful, right? What is the change in the world that we'd like to make with those folks for the folks who consume the products and services that we make? And that's a qualitative statement. It's inspirational. It's aspirational, right? This is the reason we get out of bed every day. This is what gets us going. This is why we're doing the work. The key results are the quantitative side of the conversation, and they tell us how do we know that we've achieved the objective. And specifically, these are going to be metrics. They're going to be measurable. They are going to be verifiable with evidence. So we're going to be able to look at analytics and reporting and research, et cetera, to prove that these are real numbers. And excuse me, sorry about that. And most importantly, key results are outcomes. They are measures of human behavior. And this is the thing that makes OKRs different. And this is the things that makes OKRs difficult, because you'll notice that in neither the description of the objective nor the description of the key result did I say that the goal is to build a thing or to deliver a service or to launch a campaign. In both those situations, I said, what's the customer benefit we'd like to see in the world? And what's the customer behavior that tells us that we've achieved that benefit? And this is where things get interesting, because so many teams are used to managing to output. And so we're going to manage the outcomes with OKRs done in this way.
Right. Yes. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, so as you rightly mentioned, just to add on to what you said, objectives gives you the direction, right? In terms of achieving something, if you want to set the direction, objectives do it for you. So use objectives for setting a specific, measurable, timely direction. You may consider all the characteristics that any goal, any objective should have in defining your objectives. On top of objectives, you are going to define the milestones. So basically defining how you're going to reach the direction you set through the objectives. So here's the key difference in objectives and key results. In other goal setting frameworks, we do not talk about these milestones. We basically define what it is that someone is trying to achieve, what you are trying to achieve. So we bridge the gap, the missing link, which is how to achieve them. So how to achieve them is answered through a set of milestones. So generally, the recommendation is that you come up with 3 to 5 key results, 3 to 5 milestones in terms of accomplishing the objective that you set. So with that, I would like to go into the next question. Jeff, the question that I want to ask you is about various other management methodologies around us. So there are ample set of goal setting frameworks, critical thinking frameworks. Now, one might have the question, hey, why should I use objectives and key results over every other management methodology around me? So what is your stance on that?
So the fundamental difference is that we have been managing particularly digital products and services teams, but really all teams, right, to the standards that have been set by 100+ years of industrial manufacturing. In that world, the production of goods in an efficient, cost-efficient, and success, consistent way is what defines success. In today's world, there's too much change. Things move too quickly, and especially in digital products and services, people's expectations change on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And so the systems that we have to deliver changes to our digital products and services allow us to deliver those changes as quickly as we want, right? At the extreme end of things, you've got Amazon. Amazon ships code to production every second, right? That's how fast they can do it. And so setting a goal that is based on the production of a thing as the definition of done and as the definition of success risks a whole series of assumptions that are baked into that thing. And so you're going to decide what you should build and how you should build it and how you should deliver it and how you should design it and what the copy is going to say and what the workflow should be and how you're going to sell it and go to market with it and a million other things. And all of these are risks. These are assumptions that you're baking into the product and then you're shipping, because the definition of success for you has traditionally been build a thing and ship it to market. Today, right, we have the capability to deploy many small ideas into the hands of real customers very, very quickly and to learn from them very, very quickly if we're solving a real problem in a meaningful way that they will actually use and pay for and tell their friends. And so when we manage to OKRs, we are going to take the deliverable out of the conversation. And instead, we're going to say, we know that we've built the best way to authenticate into a credit card account website when people are spending 90% less time in the authentication process. People are calling the call center about lost passwords at least 50% less, right? The time to first transaction is reduced by 25%, something along those lines. And what that does is it creates the opportunity for the teams that are doing the work to go out and innovate and be creative and discover the best combination of code, copy, and design that's going to achieve that behavior change. rather than dictating that to them and saying, I know best, you go build this thing and it's going to be great. We're asking the teams to say, look, your goal is to change human behavior in these ways. Go figure out how to best do it. And what's amazing about that is when there's an idea that's proposed and the team goes out and tests that idea, if it doesn't move the needle in the way that we've defined our key results, then that idea is wrong. And now we've collected evidence that justifies changing course, pivoting, or killing that idea, or building something else. And what's amazing about that is the definition of organizational agility, changing course based on evidence. And so OKRs enable agility in an organization. They enable a focus on the customer at all times. And they enable building an organization that deeply empathizes with the people that we build products and services for. And that's hugely powerful.
Should we define a vision? Should a company come up with a vision?
So look, I've it's interesting to ask me this. I've always struggled with this idea of a kind of a vision statement, mission, vision, or vision and mission statement, and then strategic statements. Strategy is clear to me, right? Strategy is the direction that we'd like to take the organization in the next time frame, a year, 2 years, 3 years. I think having a clear vision statement of kind of what the purpose is of the organization, I think that's important as well, but it's not particularly actionable, right? The strategic statements are where this gets actionable. And so what's nice about strategic statements is that you can actually derive clear objectives and key results from them if we have a strategy, number one. Not every organization does, and that we all agree on it, right? So strategically, our goal for 2024 into 2025 is we need to expand into the European market, right? That's our strategic direction, and you can start to define objectives and key results out of that strategic direction. You can say we'd like to become, the easiest way to shop for furniture online in Europe by the end of 2025. And then we're looking for key results that tell us that we're acquiring European customers and building a European business. And so you can write OKRs without a strategy, but you can write much better and aligned OKRs if your organization does have a strategy statement, right? It does have a strategic direction for the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, something along those lines, right? And I think that's a very different thing than a vision statement, right? A vision statement is something like, affordable furniture for all, or something like that, right? Like that's a vision statement. That's not necessarily actionable. It does ground us in a particular direction, but it doesn't tell us what to do, what we're trying to achieve in the next 6 months or 12 months or beyond that. So that's how I feel about those elements. And again, I'll just repeat myself just to say this. I think OKRs are much better done when you have an agreed upon strategy. It's not to say that you can't write OKRs without it. It's just that you're going to get this team writing one set of goals and that team writing another set of goals and this one writing a third set of goals. And there's not a whole lot of alignment between them.
Completely aligning with what you just said. So my recommendation for the companies that I'm consulting is also in the same lines. And what I do is I basically work with the senior leadership teams to come up with something called BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. This is a long-term, very high-level, ambitious goal. So the reason why I recommend that is if you want to chase something big, you got to define that at a high level. So start with this term BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. Now, when you have that, then the next step is for you to come up with a strategy. And I recommend that the strategy you come up with should be a traction strategy. That is to get the right level of traction internally and externally. Generally, certain strategies, most of the strategies might not demand the right level of traction. So strategy should be something that is just theoretical and kept within the leadership teams. What are the top 3 challenges that you have seen in the organizations?
First and foremost is removing deliverables, output from the goals. That proves to be incredibly difficult. We're all so conditioned to think about, well, what are we making? And when will it be done? Right? And what's the ROI of making that thing? And taking that out of the conversation is extremely difficult for a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks who really struggle with that, particularly leadership. So that's number one. Number two, there is, even if you can successfully do that, there's a real challenge around, okay, well, what are the teams going to be working on? What are they doing? Right. So if they're not, I agree to these goals that have human behavior as the measure of success, but what are the teams going to be working on? And the real answer, right? The real answer is the teams don't know and nobody knows. But that's not a comfortable answer. And so people, have to get comfortable with the uncertainty of discovering what we're going to be working on. We'll make some guesses, we'll write some hypotheses, and then we'll start to figure out if they're the right ones. And I think that's a really big challenge for especially as you kind of go up in the organization. People really want to know what the teams are working on, and the answer, I don't know, is not a good answer. And then I think the third challenge is rewards and incentives. There's a real ingrained culture of, you made a thing and I'm going to reward you for making the thing. And because it's easy, right? Making a thing is binary. Like, look, there it is. I made the thing, right? And if that was my job, then I should be rewarded for it. And that's really easy to measure. It's easy to manage. It's easy to reward. It becomes a lot more difficult to say, well, did you change human behavior enough? Right. So, for example, we talked about authenticating into a credit card site more quickly. Let's say our key result was to reduce the amount of time it takes somebody to authenticate by 90%. And let's say that a team works for 3 months or 6 months, and they manage to reduce the time that it takes a cardholder to authenticate, but they reduced it by 55%. The goal was 90. What do I do with that? Is it good? Is it bad? Do I reward them? Do I fire them? It's really not clear. The companies that I work with, which are primarily large and mid-sized companies, they don't have the incentive structure, the performance management criteria to deal with this way of working, right? It's continuous learning, continuous improvement, course correction, where you're not anchored in the production of a thing. And that's really, really difficult, especially for large organizations.
When trying to apply objectives and key results, or any other methodology for that matter, companies tend to get into a very narrow boxes. They might not understand the underlying principles behind the given methodology, in this case, objectives and key results. And due to that, also due to the ignorance and the urgency they have in terms of applying what they found, they tend to get into the traps. In your opinion, in your observation, what are the top 3 traps that you have observed in the organizations?
It's really interesting. So I think the first is forcing output into the key results, and they'll say things like I'll give you an example. They'll look at a list of tasks, right? So the marketing team creates 3 posters, the advertising team runs 5 campaigns, and they're like, look, Jeff, it's who does what by how much. Advertising team runs campaigns 5 times, right? And that's true, right? It's who does what by how much. But these are not the people whose behavior you're trying to change. This is a list of tasks designed to change the behavior of your customers, of your users in this particular case. And so they'll work around the KR needing to be an outcome by putting in a task like that. And that, to me, is again, it's it's an attempt to get around the rule, but it's a difficult thing for organizations to break because they're so used to kind of, well, did you launch 3 campaigns? Well, yeah, I launched 3 campaigns. Okay, great. Did anyone click on those campaigns? Well, I mean, you asked me to launch the campaigns. That's what I did, right? So to me, that's number one. It's forcing the key results in there. I think another challenge for organizations is the getting comfortable with the uncertainty of product development, and then being willing to change course based on learning. Now, this is a complicated issue. It's a complicated issue because at some point, somebody in the organization has committed to a certain set of features. We are going to build X and Y and Z, and we're going to get it done by the end of the year. And now you've got your OKRs on top of that. And as the team is working towards their OKRs, they realize that X and Y don't make sense anymore. They're not going to help us achieve our key results. And so where this gets difficult is, first of all, the teams that have made these discoveries, they have to feel comfortable going back to their leaders and saying, hey, boss, I know we said we're going to build X and Y. Everything we're learning from the market right now with our experiments and our customer conversations and all that work is telling us that X and Y aren't going to work. We need to build something else, right? We'll still build Z, but now we got to build in A and B, right? They have to be comfortable with that. That psychological safety has to be there. And if it's not there, no matter how much learning these folks do, they're never going to go and change course, which means the whole process breaks apart. That's number one. The second thing is, if those teams feel comfortable raising their hands and saying, hey, boss, guess what? X and Y aren't going to work to achieve our key results, the boss has to be willing to change course, right? There's an element of humility here that has to exist in the organization that allows the boss to say, you know what? I thought X and Y were really going to do it for us. Doesn't seem like that, the teams have learned that it's not going to work, and I'm willing to change course based on what they learned. That's huge and rare, and it doesn't happen that often because it feels like to the executive that they were wrong, and somehow being wrong is risky or bad. And that's the other trap there, right? Is that being wrong shouldn't be risky. It shouldn't be bad. We are going to be wrong. We can't predict the future. And so what we should incentivize is the speed of learning to find out if we're right or if we're wrong, right? Because if you spend 6 months on something and then you find out that you were wrong and you come to me, hey, boss, we were wrong about this, I have a right to be pissed off about that. You burned 6 months to find out that you were wrong, right? And that's true. But if you spent 6 days on that and came back to me and said, hey, boss, listen, we spent 6 days on this. Nothing we're trying is really resonating. We need to pivot. That's a much, much better conversation. And so all of those pieces have to be in place: psychological safety, humility, and understanding that tasks aren't key results for OKRs to take root successfully inside organizations.
All right. Thank you very much for those insights about the traps. Absolutely, I agree. These are 3 key traps that I also observe in OKR application. A lot of companies tend to make these silly mistakes, making their application absolutely messy and unproductive. So the next question is to help the audience to tackle these traps. Now, if someone is going through these problematic areas, if they are being trapped into these areas, let's talk about the solutions. So what do you suggest as the solutions for these traps? How can companies get out of these traps?
Sure. I think one of the most important things that you can do if you're trying to introduce OKRs, and particularly OKRs with outcomes as the key results, is at the beginning of a new initiative, the fundamental question that we want to pose to every team that is using these OKRs is, what's the most important thing we need to learn next? And this is why that's different. Most teams, I would say the overwhelming majority of teams, when they start a new cycle, a new sprint, the next phase of an initiative, they'll say, what's the next thing we need to make? And instead, I want those teams not to think about making a thing, but I want them to think about the risks inherent in what they're about to make. What's the most important thing we need to learn is a question about risk, right? Of the ideas that we have on the table, where are the risks? Well, which one's the best idea? We don't know. Of the ideas that we think are good, do we know if customers want them? Do we know if this fits into their workflow? Do we know if this will be a better solution than what they're currently using? Right? We want those kinds of questions to come up, because what you can then do is design experiments to determine how risky those things are and whether you need to overcome them or you can ignore them and start to build your thing. And so the idea here is that we're collecting evidence and adjusting our course about what we're building based on simply asking a different question at the beginning of the cycle, right? What's the most important thing we need to learn in this cycle? And then building learning activities to figure that out. It's really, really important. That starts to get us out of that output mindset. The other part of moving this forward is ensuring that the definition of success for these teams, and this is really interesting and it's difficult, right? Because I've worked with so many companies who have set OKRs and have written good OKRs with human behavior as their key results, but then the performance management criteria, the incentive structure for the company just doesn't change. And so we're asking folks to change human behavior with their goals, but we're paying and rewarding them for delivering features. Guess which one they're going to do? They're going to do the one that gets them paid. Always. So your OKRs are going to break down. And that's a huge, messy, can of worms, right? Incentive structures and performance management criteria. It spills over into job descriptions and promotions, and career tracks and all that kind of stuff. So it's big, and for that reason, I don't know if it's a good reason, but for that reason, organizations avoid it because it really starts to unpack a lot of sort of the corporate hierarchy, the definition of that corporate hierarchy that's been in place for a while. And that's another reason why this struggles. And so really thinking about
one of the key differences between any other management methodology and objectives and key results is the fact that objectives and key results insist that you got to have a cycle in your application. That means it's not a one-off event that you just deploy at the beginning of the year and then forget about it, like what you probably do in other frameworks like objective setting or MBOs. Objectives and key results got to have a cycle where you have a set of mandated cadences that are executed at different time intervals. So my question to you is, what are the recommended must-have cadences that organizations should follow?
So we're going to talk about quarterly, monthly, and weekly check-ins. Okay. So, or weekly or sprintly, depending on whether you work in weeks or in sprints. We're going to set our OKRs once a year at the beginning or the end of a year. We're not going to spend a lot of time on those OKRs because they're guesses, they're assumptions. And we're going to start working. Now, on a quarterly basis, we are going to get together with our stakeholders and dependent teams and talk about our progress towards our KRs, what we've learned along the way, what we believe makes sense to do next, how we might adjust our work to do that, and then we come to some sort of agreement about the work that we're going to do over the next quarter. On a monthly basis, the team is going to get together and say, hey, great, how are we doing towards our key results, right? What progress are we making? Are we delivering on our promises? Have we invalidated any of our solution hypotheses? Have we learned new ideas that might require a new hypothesis to be written? Right? We want to build that in there. And then on a sprintly basis or a weekly basis, the team just kind of level checks. Hey, what's new? How's it going? What did we see? Did we deploy that thing last week? How's it, how is it performing? Should we scale it up? Do we need to tweak it? And really kind of the very, very tactical day-to-day changes that the team needs to make to their backlog of work. I'll give you an example. I worked on a team once, and this was a very basic and kind of almost antiquated way of doing this, but I worked on a team once that had a very specific metric to change. And while we met with our stakeholders quarterly and we met with us and some dependent teams on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, which is even, I didn't even talk about a daily basis. On a daily basis, one of our engineers would come in and do a query into the system to see where the metric that we were moving was today. And then that engineer would print that number really big on a piece of paper with the delta from yesterday, right? So, let's say the number was 14% increase yesterday, right? Today, it's down to 11. And he would print that and make 15 copies and stick it up around the office. Everybody could see it. Everybody knew if we were going up, if we were going down, in the right direction, the wrong direction. We were literally updating people on a daily basis. And that kind of focus on the behavior change as the measure of success galvanized the team on a kind of consistently on daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. And it really got the whole organization wrapped up in our work. They were like, wow, you guys are doing great. Oh, crap. Your numbers went down over the weekend. What happened? Tell us about that. And so anything you can do to encourage that sort of transparency into your work goes a long way. And the value of this way of working becomes evident to the rest of the organization.
Among many other reasons why OKR adoption or any other management initiative would fail, there's this reason, that is lack of accountability, lack of commitment due to lack of accountability. Now, my next question is around accountability. So my belief is that you got to put the right people in the right seats. So the suggestion came from the book's Traction, right? If you want to implement any massive change, any big change in any given organization, you got to ensure that the people work towards that initiative are accountable. In other words, the people in your company got to be accountable. So generally, we don't have the optimal level of understanding and accountability from people. So as a leadership teams, your responsibility is to ensure that you make your people accountable. In order to do that, you need to put the right people in the right seat. How can a company make its people accountable?
Yeah. So OKRs, I think, solves for this. And it solves for this because if done correctly, no OKR is an orphan. And what I mean by that is that every team that sets their own OKR, they understand exactly who the parents are of that OKR. In other words, they're going to serve this team. I work on a team, I set an OKR. That OKR that we're working towards serves as a leading indicator to something that happens above me or beyond me or the next step in the process, right? So, if I can get folks to authenticate successfully into the product quickly without any issues, without having to call the call center, well, they're transacting more frequently. They're transacting more successfully, which means that features are being used more often and that revenue is being gained and costs are being lowered, right? And so the thing that I'm working on, I'm not working on revenue. I'm not working on profit. I'm not working on cost. I'm working on authentication, but it's a leading indicator for some of these other things, right? And so I know that what I do is important to my world where I have my influence, but I also know the impact that work has further into the organization, right? And so while I'm not on the hook, I'm not accountable for profit margins, I have a direct impact on that. And I know that, right? And so we know exactly who's responsible for what in the organization. And there's a tremendous amount of pride, I think, and accountability and responsibility that teams take when they set their own goals within their sphere of influence, and they have a clear sense of how that goal impacts other teams in the company. And so again, I think OKRs done correctly drive that accountability that's so missing in so many, feature teams, right? Hey, I'm building a new authentication workflow. Okay. Why? Right? How do we know it's good? How do we know it's bad? Well, I don't know. I'm just building it because that's what somebody told me to do. And so I'm accountable for shipping it and nothing more beyond that. And to me, that's a very tactical and short-sighted way of looking at product and ultimately business development and growth.
The next question is about another critical element of greatness, that is stretching. Be it personal, be it professional, without stretching, pretty much no growth. So, however, it's something that you got to manage carefully. You should stretch yourself, but at the same time, you need to know your boundaries. You shouldn't try to overstretch yourself, which might be damaging. So the question is, should the companies stretch their goals? If so, what's your recommendation? How could a company stretch their goals?
So your key results do need to be stretch goals, but they should be like, you should be hitting, the rule of thumb is 75 to 80% of your key results on a quarterly basis. And why is that, right? I think that if you set goals that are completely unreasonable, teams are just going to get frustrated and eventually be like, okay, these goals mean nothing because, they want me to increase usage by 300%. And, last year we saw a growth of 7%. Right. So we got to make it reasonable. Right. But if you make it too low and people are just crushing their key results every quarter, they're not trying hard enough. They're not being creative. They're not being innovative. They're not pushing the product or the system forward. And so I think if folks are expected to hit 75 to 80% as a measure of good, then they're going to push themselves to be a bit more creative, a bit more innovative, to move the product forward in a new way, to really think hard about how they might improve a customer experience. And I think that kind of stretching is healthy, right? Rather than sort of, hey, I need you to triple your results next year when we know that's not realistic. So to me, I think 75 to 80% of the goal should be about right. But rewarding people who get 85, 90, 100% as well, I think is valuable as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I agree, right? So that's where I also kind of believe we should stretch ourselves, but we shouldn't go beyond the limits. Then it's going to be a bit of a damage, right? We are going to break ourselves just trying to do that. So as you said, I think I personally recommend the same, right? Even in terms of hitting the capacity, probably around 70% capacity is a good number to look at in terms of planning the work that you're supposed to do.
All right, thank you very much. And I have another question with regard to another term that I find in the OKR world, particularly if you're someone studying the history of objectives and key results, how it was invented, what was the cause behind this invention, you come across this term called management by objectives. This was originally found by the legendary leader Peter Drucker. When Andy Grove started adopting MBOs, he just figured that MBO is not the most appropriate goal-setting methodology or the critical thinking methodology that he can think of. So that was the invention. That is how Andy Grove started exploring about objectives and key results. Now, my question to you is, what are the differences between management by objectives that was coined by Peter Drucker and objectives and key results that was found by Andy Grove?
The way that John Doerr defines OKRs isn't as strict as the way that we define it in our book. The most important thing in our book, and in fact, the book is named after this, is that your key results must be outcomes. They must be measures of human behavior. And the way that you know that you've written a measure of human behavior is it answers the question, who does what by how much? Right? So if we're going to build the easiest way to authenticate into our credit card site by the end of the year, how do we know, right? Who does what by how much? Cardholders spend 70% less time in the authentication process, right? Who does what by how much? That's how we know that we've written an outcome-based key result. John Doerr isn't that strict, and neither was Andy Grove in their management by objectives and then eventually OKRs that came out of that when it comes to the measure of success. For them, there were a lot of tasks and actions and deliverables at times that were sufficient as a key result. In my opinion, that doesn't change things as fundamentally as key results being outcomes. Because if you think about it, right, if your key result is, your objective is to create the easiest way to authenticate into the credit card site, and then your key results are deploy, facial recognition, right? Launch an ad campaign about facial recognition, right? None of those things actually tell you that you've delivered the easiest way to authenticate into the site, right? They're just features of your process. They may be good, they may be bad, they may be wrong, they may be right. They could be well designed, poorly designed. We don't know, right? And so output, making stuff as the measure of success, it doesn't make sense anymore in a world, especially in a digital world, where you can deploy updates to the product as fast as you want. And so to me, that's kind of the fundamental difference between the MBOs from Doerr and Andy Grove to the OKRs and Measure What Matters to the OKR definition that we have in Who Does What by How Much. And to be super, super clear, we've built on top of their ideas. We're just extending the idea forward. To increase the agility of your organization and to make sure that you're reducing the waste of not building things that people don't want, OKRs are a path to that. The concept is simple. The implementation is more difficult, but when done well and successfully, it makes an organization unstoppable.
What a great discussion so far. And unfortunately, we got to wrap up the discussion here. Thank you very much for joining and sharing your valuable insights, great tips and tricks that our community can start adopting, start using for their OKR application. Now, those who are watching us, if you do have any questions, if you do have any clarifications in terms of objectives and key results, reach out to Jeff, reach out to me to adopt and optimize your OKR. With that, we are going to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for spending your time watching this particular podcast. Until we see you with another great talk just like this, take care, stay safe, may the force be with you. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your time here. This is the Agile Wisdom Podcast.